All right, now our overall objective is to give an account of human society and thus of human civilization because we need to explain how human society is different from other animal societies. There are all sorts of social animals from the ants on up to the elephants, and they have all sorts of interesting social phenomena, and you can read about them in any of these ethology books. But there's something special about humans, and there are several special things about humans, and our aim is to explain that. My dog Gilbert is a very intelligent dog, but right now in this past week I've been worried about income tax. Gilbert is not worried about income tax. He's no use to me at all. And it's no, you might say, well, he's too dumb. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he would agree with that judgment, but the fact is he just does not worry about itemized deductions or Schedule C or deferred maintenance and all that kind of stuff that is so much fun. By the way, if you don't worry about income tax, you will. Okay, it's part of the curse of modern life. Okay, so our aim is to show how human civilization exists, what is its structure, what is its ontology, and that will have consequences for the explanation of human behavior. Because if you don't get the ontology right, you won't get the explanatory mechanisms right. Now, we've actually made quite a lot of progress. And remember, a condition of adequacy of the analysis is that it's got to show that we live in one world. You can't postulate that there's a mental world and a physical world, that there's a social world and a mental world and a physical world. That's worse than cheating. It is cheating, but it's worse than cheating because it's giving up. The aim, it just says you're giving up on the idea that you can really explain this phenomena. So we've got to show, and I did that rather briefly, how consciousness and intentionality are natural biological phenomena. Once you have big carbon-based molecules and they start to evolve, you're going to get life. And once you get certain kinds of complex life, you're going to get consciousness and intentionality. And once you got consciousness and intentionality, you're off and running. Now, there are several elements that we need to construct a human society and human civilization. And I got to one of them last time, and that was collective intentionality. Human beings have this remarkable capacity. Lots of other animals have it, though that's in dispute, by the way, how many animals have it. I'll tell you about that dispute in a minute. Humans have this remarkable capacity to cooperate, and there's certain forms of cooperation by which they create and utilize social realities. I mean, university is an obvious example, but watch a football game or an orchestra, or just two people going for a walk together, and you will observe collective intentionality in action. Now, there are some interesting structural problems about collective intentionality. The first problem is, how can it be the case that there's collective intentionality when all of the intentionality that exists has to be in individual brains? And I answered that. I gave a swift answer to that, saying you can have an irreducible collective intentionality in individual brains. The only thing you have to remember is that the requirement that the intentionality be in individual brains does not imply that it all has to be in the form of the first person singular. You can have an irreducible collective intentionality in the form of the first person plural in individual brains. So, for example, we are now conducting a class in the philosophy of society, and I am giving a lecture, and you are listening and taking lecture notes. That's a case where we are doing something collectively, and each of us is an I that's making some individual contribution or doing some individual component of the collective intentionality of conducting a course in the philosophy of society. Okay, so that's the first problem that we solved, and that is you can have collective intentionality in individual brains, and thus you don't violate the requirements of methodological individualism. But now the next requirement gave me a lot of headaches, and that is, how can it be the case that I am making my individual contribution, which is different from your individual contribution, and yet each of us is contributing to a collective goal. And in that article, Collective Intentions in Action, I considered various ways of solving that, and there's only one that works. I couldn't do it all collectively. I couldn't say it's collective down to the ground, because of course your intentionality is not part of mine, not part of my intentional content. And similarly, it can't do it individually. I can't say, well, it's my intention that we win the war, because of course I can't do it all by myself. All I can do is make my contribution. So anyway, I finally got a solution to that, but it's a notational solution, and we'll have to go over it slowly and figure out how it works. Now there's another issue that I haven't talked about much, but I will talk about, and that is intentional causation. What we're going to find is that the key to understanding the explanation of human social behavior is intentional causation, and that's the key to understanding human behavior anyway, is you must get intentional causation right. Why did you vote for Barack Obama? Well, I thought he would have a better foreign policy than Bush, and I thought McCain would follow Bush's foreign policy, and that's why I voted for Obama. Now, that's an answer, this sort of answer people give, and that appeals to intentional causation. But what is intentional causation, and how can it explain? By the way, this is a continuous problem in the social sciences. They are embarrassed by appealing to this common sense intentional causation. It doesn't look scientific. So they have all sorts of elaborate mathematical, games theoretical devices for avoiding what seems to be an appeal to intentional causation. And indeed, the history of the philosophy of social science over the past century has been in large part about trying to find alternatives to common sense intentional causation. And we've been through a whole lot of those. Games theory was one, but sociobiology was another. Structuralism was one. Post-structuralism. I hadn't even figured out what structuralism was when post-structuralism came along. Some famous Frenchman who was a structuralist came to Berkeley and lectured, and I asked him, what is this structuralism anyhow? And he looked at me as if he knew this is a plot. I obviously knew what structuralism was. I was trying to lure him into a trap. And he gave some evasive answer. It was an honest question. I didn't know what the hell structuralism was. I figured out what it was. It's a misunderstanding of socio. I'll tell you about that later. But then I no sooner got that in focus than post-structuralism came along. And I don't think anybody ever figured out what post-structuralism was. But it was lost in a sea of something even worse called postmodernism. And I don't know what happened to postmodernism. Maybe swamp is a better metaphor than sea there. But in any case, we'll get to all of these wonderful ways of explaining things. I'll never forget, Levi-Strauss gave a lecture. The great Claude Levi-Strauss gave a lecture in Zellerbach. Absolutely packed audience. I was there among the assembled masses listening to the great thinker. And he said that this sort of thing where you appeal to this common sense causation, that was the explanation suitable for shop girls. Midinette, I think was the word that he used. Shop girls might explain behavior using this sort of common sense causation. He did that because he wanted that. Whereas we scientists, we have much more heavy-duty scientific methods for explaining things. Well, we'll see about that. I mean, mathematics is applied in economics. It makes it look as if you're not talking about intentional causation, but I think, in fact, you are. And indeed, the fact that people tended to forget that they fell in love with their models, with the mathematical models, and the mathematical models in economics looked like a lot like the mathematical models in physics, made everybody forget. We're actually talking about human buyers and sellers with all their muddled desires, and now the mess. We're still living with the mess that came about. See, by classic free market theory, there can't be any such a thing as a toxic asset because its toxicity, a market has more information than any theorist could ever have. Its toxicity will become immediately available to the market. Well, that didn't happen. The assets, I've mentioned this, the absurdity of these metaphors before. We'll come back to that. Okay, so we got two things we're going to talk about today. Collective intentionality and intentional causation. And then we're getting closer to our goal. Then maybe today, or if not today, then Thursday, I'm going to explain to you the basic ontology of human civilization. It's very simple. Human civilization is created by repeated application of the same dumb-looking, well, I don't know if it's dumb-looking, but the same linguistic operation. It requires language. Gilbert can't do it. He hasn't got his doggy method of communication won't do it, and I don't know any animal language, any animal signaling system that can do it, but I'm going to tell you how our language does it. Okay, all of that is by way of introduction. Now here we go. We're going to finish the discussion of collective intentionality. Questions about what I said so far? Everybody up with us? You don't have a question yet, but you will later on. Okay, I'm counting on you. Yes, yeah.
Clarify what intentional causation is, where the cause is.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'm going to say more about that later, so I won't do it in any length now. Basically, the thing to understand about intentional causation is that the mental state can cause the very event that it represents. It can cause its own condition of satisfaction, or in some cases, the condition of satisfaction causes the mental state. So, to take a rather tiresome and boring example, I have an intention and action to raise my arm and watch the damn thing goes up. Now, what is the explanation for its going up? Well, in ordinary speech, we would say, I raised it. That's why it went up. There could have been other causes. I could have had a heavy watch on, and there's a magnet in the ceiling, or unknown to me, there are invisible electric wires, invisible wires that are being used to pull it up, but that's not what caused it. What caused it to go up was I had in my jargon, I had an intention in action. I tried to make it go up, and that caused it to go up. But in ordinary speech, we would just say it went up because I raised it, and that specifies the form of the intentionality. Now, that looks like a not very grand form of intentional causation, but it is intentional causation. And now notice that though we use this every day. Why are you driving to San Francisco? Well, I have tickets to the opera, and I'm going to get I have to get there on time to get a place to park and go to the opera. We use this form of explanation every day, but it doesn't fit the standard philosopher's account of causation. There have been a number of overwhelming disasters in the history of philosophy. Among them are Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Spinoza, Leibniz. I don't want to go through the whole roster. But one of the really great disasters is Hume's account of causation. It's the single greatest work of philosophy in the English language, but it is a catastrophe because Hume taught us three false propositions. One is you can never observe the causal relation. Oh yeah, just watch. And two, for every singular causal statement, there must be a universal law, or as Hume says, a constant conjunction of resembling instances. You remember Hume, priority, contiguity, and the constant conjunction of resembling instances. And if you don't remember that, rush out of the room immediately and read Hume on causation, because it is, as I said, it's probably the best single piece of philosophical prose in English. It is a stunning work. It gets a bit tiresome because he's a kid in his 20s, and he's so excited at this discovery. He keeps repeating it over and over and over, but still, it is wonderfully written. It's in Book 1, Part 3 of Hume's celebrated treatise. And if you're going to zero in, I would say Part 3, Section 14. But, you know, that's cheating because that's maybe only 20 pages long. And you ought to go through the whole glory of it all. All right. So what Hume taught us is, 1, you can never observe the causal relation. 2, for every singular causal statement, there must be a causal law. And 3, causal relations can never be logical relations. They're always accidental contingent regularities. And this is sometimes called the regularity theory of causation, but the truth is it's contemporary orthodoxy. I mean, Davidson believed it, von Wright believed it. It's absolute. It's everybody's view. It's screamingly false for reasons that I will explain to you, and its falsity is shown by simple examples like this one. I decided to raise my arm. That caused me to have an intention and action, and the intention and action caused my arm to go up. Okay, I'm going to say more about that later. Now we're still on collective intentionality. Any other questions at this point in the ball game? I'm going to take my coat off. Either I'm getting some exercise or it's actually warm in here But if I put that there, you can't hear it, right? Can you hear it? Huh? No. Okay, I'll wave it around like a rock musician. What? All right, we'll try it. You see, essentially, the main pedagogical problems today are sartorial. How about that? Is that working? All right, we'll try it. Okay. As I say, maybe I attach it to my chin or one of my teeth. All right, here we go with collective intentionality. Now, the problem with collective intentionality is we have to get this feature of the intention in action, and you remember the intention in action is causally self-reflexive. So if I'm raising my arm, then the conditions of satisfaction are that this in intention action, this IA causes the bodily movement. It causes my arm to go up. That's the simplest kind of case. But how do you do that when you have collective intention, where you have a collective goal, it's achieved by means of a singular means? I am doing one thing and you're doing something else. And how do you do it where you get big groups of people where we're all fighting for victory in the Second World War, and I'm making my contribution to the war effort and you're making your contribution? How do you get the relationship between the individual and the collective? Well, I went through various ways of trying to do it, and none of them worked. You can find this in the assigned article. It's in the reader from Copy Central, and the article is called Collective Intentions and Actions, or something like that. It's got an obvious title. And there I tried to think, well, maybe it's all inside the collective, but that's wrong, because we have to distinguish between my contribution and your contribution. And maybe it's individual down to the ground. No, that won't work, because that doesn't identify the fact that each of us is making a contribution to a collective goal. Now, some people just cheat and say, well, in collective intentionality, you have meshing subplans. That's what Bratman calls meshing subplans. But that's the name of the problem. That's not the solution. You have to say what exactly the subplans are. So I considered a case where people are making a hollandaise sauce, and we're making a collective goal to make the sauce by means of me stirring and you pouring. Now, we have to get what my intentionality is and what your intentionality is and how they are aimed at a collective goal. And the solution I got was to say, well, there is a certain type of intention where it's an intention to achieve a collective goal B by means of me making my singular contribution A and you making your contribution C. So if this is my part where I'm stirring and you're pouring, I've never made hollandaise sauce, but I'm told if you do it right, somebody has to pour and somebody else has to stir. Nowadays, it's presumably all done with machines, which is why it tastes so awful. You buy it in shops; it never tastes like the real thing. But in any case, if you do it right, somebody has to pour the ingredients while the other person stirs. Okay, I imagine that I'm pouring and you're stirring. Now, the solution that I came up with is this. You have to identify that there's a class of intentions which are the case of we are achieving a collective goal, but I am making my contribution and you are making your contribution. So if I wrote down your contribution, it would be IA collective B by means of a singular C, because yours is different from mine, and it's this IA causes it to be the case that as C, the ingredients are poured, and that in that context causes it to be the case as B, causes it to be the case as B that the sauce is made, that it's adequately mixed. This is supposed to be a C and not a bracket. Okay, so this is one guy. This is guy number one. This is his intentionality. And this is guy number two. This is his intentionality. And together they add up to mixing the sauce. So you have to identify a special class of collective intentions. And my intention is to stir while you pour, and your intention is to pour while I stir. Now that's a case where you know what the other person is trying to do, but often you don't know what the other person is trying to do. As I told you in a football play, when we are exiting a pass play, I know what my assignment is. As a offensive lineman, my assignment is to block one of the pass rushers. But I don't know what the pass patterns are, and I don't need to know. Even the quarterback doesn't know everybody's assignment. He only knows what he's got to do. He's got to go through his receivers 1, 2, 3 and throw to whoever is open. Okay, so that seems to me the essence of collective behavior. Now remember, we found two types of relations. One is the causal by means of, and the other is a constitutive by way of. And the constitutive by way of will figure largely when we get to institutional behavior, where you're voting in an election doesn't cause voting to take place, but it constitutes voting. It constitutes, if we all do it, then it constitutes voting. It constitutes conducting an election. Now this has to be read carefully. It reads as, this intention in action, and this colon means causes it to be the case as A, that the ingredients are stirred, which in that context causes it to be the case as B, that the sauce is mixed, that the sauce is made. All right, so any questions about that? That's my solution then to the problem of collective intentionality. Collective intentionality exists in individual brains, but you can have a difference in the content of each person's collective intentionality, provided that you recognize that there is a class of intentionality that goes with collective behavior, that we are doing this. How are we doing it? We're doing it by means of my doing my part and you doing your part. Each of us does our part on the assumption that the desired result will come about, that collectively we will cause it to be the case that the sauce is mixed. There's one more question, then I'll take questions. One more point. One thing that worries me is, of course, for massive actions, it seems unrealistic to say, let's say, my job is to peel potatoes for the troops, and that's my contribution to the war effort. So if my efforts cause the potatoes to be peeled, we win the war. Well, you got to heavily qualify that, which causes it to be the case in that context, assuming everything else is going all right, that we win the war. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make my contribution to the war effort, and it's not the suggestion that I'm winning the war single-handedly. That's not the implication. However, that's a nervous-making feature of the analysis, and maybe I have to refine the formulation to get out of that implication. Yeah, a question at the back. You had a question. Yeah. Well, if the different parties are not cooperating effectively, it won't work. You will fail. But what I'm trying to get at is what each person thinks that he or she is doing, and what they think that they're doing is, I am making our contribution to a collective goal. That is what the analysis is supposed to capture. Jennifer. Oh, I see. I see. If it's meant, that doesn't matter. All I'm doing is mixing the sauce. If some guy thinks this is going to be the greatest sauce that ever existed, and the other guy thinks this is really just garbage, it'll unclog the plumbing, that's okay. It doesn't matter for this purpose. Yes.
So you said with the case of like peeling potatoes for the war, you have to include the fact that assuming everything else goes right, cause
Yeah. Right.
Why don't you have that in the holiday sauce? Because you have to assume that the singularity C also works.
Yeah. But the answer to that is that, I mean, I think that's right. But what I have to assume is that if we all do our bit, we will succeed. That's the assumption. And what I'm trying to capture is that I am making my contribution, And the idea, I mean, if you put in here, this intention and action causes potatoes are peeled, which in that context causes we win the war. Okay, that seems a bit much because it's going to take a whole lot more. But in that context, where that context is short for everybody else is making their contribution, and it doesn't mean success is guaranteed. That never follows in any of these intentions in action. It's just that's what the objective is. Is it an objective is of an intention is you have to believe it's possible. You don't have to believe you're going to succeed in every effort. I happen to be singularly bad at throwing free throws from the free throw line. But all the same, that's what I'm trying to do. And the idea is that this intention and action will cause it to be the case that the ball goes through the net. Even if it doesn't happen very often, that's what I'm trying to do. Okay, other questions? Yeah.
If one of the people involved in the collective intention is being forced to do what they're doing, does it still work the same?
Okay, here is the problem. You always have deadbeats and free riders. We're all pushing the car, but it turns out you weren't really pushing. You were just going along for the ride. It doesn't matter, because what I'm trying to get here is what has to go on in each person's mind if each person is sharing the collective intentionality. But of course, in any real life situation, you have people who are just going along for the ride. They're not doing their share. Yes.
Her question might be more interesting. It's coerced joint commitment. So say you have a gun.
Yeah.
The person said, and you say, now we're going to push the car.
Yeah.
It's mafioso.
Right.
Are you having collective intentionality there? I think so.
Yeah, if the guy is actually trying to push the car, even if he's doing it under coercion, then it's a case of collective intentionality. But I thought that the case that she worried is, what about the case where there's somebody in the group who isn't actually playing their part? The violin part comes and all the other violinists are playing along, but this guy's busy working on his crossword or falling asleep or something else like that. And such cases happen. They're very real, as you'll discover in any thing involving massive cooperation. Yes?
I just have like a neat distinction. Voting would be kind of like an intention to vote would be.
Yeah, right.
Would rioting be
Okay, rioting is interesting. You see, what is the intentionality of the rioters? Well, one intentionality is we're all out having a cheerful riot. Remember, intention and action is always got at by asking, what are you doing, or what are you trying to do? Now, my guess is that most rioters will not give us an answer, I am rioting, or we are rioting, but it's something like, we are protesting the massive injustice that has been imposed upon us by this oppressive society in which we live. Rioting? Who's rioting? Not me. I'm just throwing bricks through the window as a way of protesting massive injustice. You think that was a joke? There was one day when 2,000 windows were broken on the Berkeley campus. And I'm sure each of the imbeciles breaking the windows thought, I am doing my bit to create a more just and peaceful society. I am stopping the war in Vietnam by heaving this brick through the window. So imbecility is very common in collective behavior, and particularly where you get massive collective behavior. But I think this is a deep question, and we're going to come back to that. One of the difficulties you see with this traditional account is the characters who write these accounts don't get the distinction between well, I haven't got there yet. I can't really say this because I haven't given you the tools. They don't get the deontology involved in social reality. In a typical institutional situation, each of us is wrapped in a system of obligations. And the obligations are things like, I have an obligation as a professor and you have a whole lot of obligations as students. But in a street riot, it's hard to identify obligations. Any kind of social obligation. Nobody, I think, would say, well, I am under an obligation to throw my brick. I doubt if anybody thought that. But this is a problem with Durkheim. Now, Durkheim is, I'm sure, a very great thinker, but he had a very impoverished theory of social facts, because he gives as one example of a social fact a street riot. But that's not an individual, that's not a social fact, an institutional fact in my sense, because there's no obligation involved. Yes.
Could you say that you felt there's an obligation because if they don't throw the brick and then everyone doesn't do that, then one brick gets thrown,
Yeah.
2,000 doesn't make as much of a statement.
Well, okay. I mean, we're going into more detail over this than I want. And she pointed out, look, that it might well be the case that somebody feels we're all making a statement here. And this is the other thing. Social behavior is speech act, and that's very common. And what I'm doing is making my contribution to our collective statement. So I have to heave my brick through the window. Otherwise, I won't be making our contribution to the collective. That is a more intellectual rioter than the ones I'm familiar with. Now, incidentally, all this sort of massive collective behavior deserves more study than it gets. There's systematic overestimation of the size of the crowds goes on in everything. It's in the newspaper and the television interest to overestimate the size of the crowd because it makes a more interesting story. The demonstrators always overestimate the size of the crowd because it makes it look like they got a bigger deal going on. I once went on a march to Oakland, and I thought it would be interesting to know how many people are on this march. It was a big march. I went to the front of the line, and it's not hard to count people. You count them in groups of 10, or a whole lot of people passing. You don't get exact figures. It's not the United States Census. And I counted about 8,000 people marching. Well, the newspapers the next day, the minimum estimate was 14,000. You see, and of course, it's in everybody's interest. And the reporters are too lazy to do what I did. Go to the front of the line and simply count. It's not hard. Or get up in the second floor of Sproul Hall and count the people assembled. But it's much more fun to just say 10,000 people were there or 20,000 people. And of course, the organizers of the riot, or if there are the march or whatever it was, they're always anxious to overestimate. So you never get an accurate crowd estimate because it's in everybody's interest to give inaccurate estimates, and nobody will take the trouble to actually count up to 8 or 10,000. Yes?
On the other end of the spectrum, if you're the only one with the intention,
Yeah.
Is it enough for it to be a collective intention if you take yourself to be cooperating but nobody else does?
If the sincere answer to the question is, we are making a hollandaise sauce, then you are mistaken in thinking that there is a we that's making the sauce. But you're not mistaken in identifying your intentional content, because that's what you were trying to do. So this, as I said once, is uncomfortable to us because it means you can be mistaken not only about what's happening in here, which everybody agrees, back to Descartes, but you can be mistaken about what kind of intentional state you're in. You thought you were acting as part of the collective, but in fact, nobody else was cooperating with you. You were not having cooperation from the other participants. Yes?
So in that case, it's just sort of the logical form of your intention.
That's right.
That dictates that and is that what makes it a primitive form?
Well, no, it isn't the logical form that makes it primitive. What makes it primitive is that I've never seen a reductive analysis that worked. I can give counterexamples to all the accounts that I've seen. Now, there is now a huge literature on collective intentionality, and I'll tell you the names and numbers of some of the players. Margaret Gilbert that's Margaret Gilbert, and Bratman down at Stanford, and of course one of the all-time champions of collective intentionality is Tuomela from Helsinki. Who else should I? Oh, yeah, Miller. Well, Miller did some of his work with Tuomela. Anyway, so this is Michael Bratman. And what's a Raimo is his name. Raimo Tuomela. And I don't forget. Well, I'll let somebody else write it down. All right. But in any case, and you can get on Google and find out alternatives to my views, but I think my view is right, and none of these other people is right. But anyway, I hope at some point you should have a chance to refute me if you want to. Yes?
What if the second person's intention, or one of the person's intention was not to make the sauce, but the pouring, and the sauce was just a byproduct of...
Yeah. No, this is the case. Now, this is a beautiful philosophical example. We need to distinguish in collective intentionality the case where I happen to observe a guy pouring and I think, now's my chance, and I rush and mix the sauce. You see, that's not the case I have in mind. But you're obviously a philosopher, because that's the case we would think of. Or the case where I happen to hear somebody playing the violin part of a duet, so I immediately I'm in the next room and I pound out the piano part of that duet. Now, I may be intending to play a duet, or it might be just happening that I happen to be practicing the piano part while you happen to be practicing the violin part, and it comes out that we play the duet without any collective intentionality. That is a logical possibility that we have to allow for. Indeed, you see, that is, all of these sound like they're trivial examples, but that is the whole doctrine of the hidden hand. I don't know why it sounds better in French, le main caché, but the guy wrote it in English, after all. And the idea of Adam Smith and the hidden hand is that if each of us behaves selfishly, if we go out and behave rationally according to free market principles, then we'll achieve this cooperative goal that society is much better off, the free market. And it'll be interesting to see what happens now, because intellectually what happened was this. The free market was the dominant ideological and theoretical principle until 1929, when it all collapsed. And nobody had a theory of what was happening in the 1930s until Keynes came along and published in 1936 the landmark book, General Theory of Employment, Money, and Interest, where he showed that the hidden hand didn't work, and he explained why it wouldn't work and why you had to have a different kind of economic policy than the one that was followed. Keynes was dominant, 50 years. It was a prodigious influence that Keynes had, and Keynesian orthodoxy was overthrown by a bunch of people, I think most prominently Milton Friedman. And the idea was that Keynes had overestimated the importance of fiscal policy, that monetary policy was sufficient, and a new mantra came in. It was the mantra of the free market. And the idea, which you find in a lot of thinkers, was the free market has much more information than any individual or any collection of individuals can have, because the free market has this information which comes from in effect the hidden hand. From everybody behaving selfishly, you get this desirable result. And that was the mantra really until a couple of years ago, when the whole thing came crashing down. Now, Keynes came back into fashion. And in fact, what Barack Obama is trying to do is more or less straight Keynesian economics. And a lot of people are objecting to that. Deficit spending to overcome the unemployment multiplier and start an employment multiplier going. And get a multiplier effect. You get a bigger effect with investment. So they're doing various things in Washington to try to get the system going again. But what we lack is there's no Keynes has emerged. There's no genius who's got a theory of what happened and why it happened. What is happening, in effect, is that Keynes is becoming fashionable again. Keynes is becoming his views are becoming more part of the mainstream. When my younger son went to the Harvard Business School, the mantra was the free market, and it was a free market over and over and over. And I asked him about, what about such and such a thing? And he said, the real free marketeers would believe in the present economic situation, a lot of Americans should simply go get jobs in China because there are jobs available in China. It's true the wage rates are a bit lower than they would be here, but if there are no jobs here, you should go where there are jobs. That's not a very intelligent view, but that is, you can see how that would follow from the free market orthodoxy. Then in the free market, people should go where jobs are available, regardless of what the wage rates are. Okay, so I'm going to go on now and talk about intentional causation, but I want to make sure everybody is on board about collective intentionality. There are alternative views, and I am not satisfied with any of them. The standard view is to try to reduce collective intentionality to individual intentionality plus mutual belief. Did I tell you about mutual belief? I don't think I did much. Let me just tell you a little bit about it. The idea is that I do something in the belief that you believe that that's what I'm doing, and you do something in the belief that I believe that you believe that I believe that that's what you're doing, and so on. You get this infinite hierarchy of beliefs about beliefs about beliefs, and that's called mutual belief. And the idea is that mutual belief is the key to understanding society, because society works on mutual belief. Now, I think you do get mutual belief out of collective intentionality, because if we are really cooperating, then I believe that you're cooperating, and you believe that I believe that you're cooperating, and so on up. But that doesn't give us an analysis. The analysis has to have, at the bottom level, we intend. It has to have that we have a collective intentionality. A collective B here means we intend. We intend to achieve B. That's the important point. We are trying to achieve that. And that, I'm going to argue, is one of the keys, not the only key, but it's one of the keys to understanding human civilization. Now, there is an issue. How far does collective intentionality go in the animal world? And Mike Tomasello argues that a lot of things that look like collective intentionality are not really collective. That the hyenas who are appear to be collectively tracking a lion and cooperating and killing the lion are not, in fact, cooperating. Each one is making judgments as to what is in his or her best interest. And Tomasello, that's how you spell his name, is opposed by a guy named Duval. Have I spelled it right? Is that how? Francis Duval works at Emory University in Atlanta. Isn't that where he's at? Yeah, he's in Atlanta. He's Dutch, in fact, but that's where he works. Tomasello, this is interesting, the international exchange of people. Mike Tomasello is an American, but he's head of the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig. And when I lectured there, everything was in English. And I think when Jennifer lectured there, it was all in English. I mean, English has now become the lingua franca. So you go to lecture to a German-financed institute in Germany, and all the proceedings are conducted in English. Good thing, too, I mean, from my point of view. Okay, other questions about this? Because this is kind of interesting stuff. Yes?
So, you're saying that you can't reduce intentionality to intentionality. Can you give us examples about failed attempts to reduce it to intentionality? But couldn't you, if you made it sufficiently complicated? I mean, it does seem like it should have a we.
Yeah. Yeah. What does cooperation mean? That's the problem. You see, that's exactly what happens. I intend to make the sauce in cooperation with you. But in cooperation with you means you are cooperating with me and we are making the sauce. Cooperation is what we're analyzing. The question is, what are the components that go into cooperation? And basically, one way to put my objection in to the standard account is they mistake cooperation for the operation of the hidden hand. I do my thing and you do your thing, and a desirable result will come out. But that's not cooperation. Cooperation is we are doing this together. And as I pointed out on a number of occasions, it's terribly important to collectives involved in any kind of conflict that you get a high level of emotional cooperation. Think of a football team or an army or a political party, and there has to be a great deal. There is a passionate commitment. It's interesting to see what the coach did when the 49ers behaved so scandalously on Sunday. No reason why you should be interested in these intellectual efforts, but I did watch a game and I was scandalized. And the coach, in an effort to achieve cooperation, humiliated all the star players in front of the other players by calling them out and telling them what a bunch of bums they were. I wasn't there. It was only reported second and third hand. And this is a case of attempting to reinforce collective intentionality. However, it's dangerous because if you demoralize everybody, if you humiliate enough, then it has the reverse effect. Yes?
Are you saying that the statement, I intend to
No, I'm not saying it's logically impossible. What it means is I intend to cooperate means I intend to share collective intentionality with you. If I say I intend to cooperate with you, what that means is I intend to share collective intentionality with you. What I'm suggesting is you don't solve your problem by appealing to cooperation. Cooperation is the name of the problem. What it constitutes cooperation. And there it is, all on the blackboard. Yes, you're next.
Give me an example of a collection of individual intentionalities. What would
Sure. Well, I just gave an example of a few moments ago. A guy is just pouring this because he thinks, gee, that makes a beautiful pattern. He's a hyper-aesthetic guy, and he thinks, the way the light flows in as I pour these two, and if I get right in the window, see, it's gorgeous. I mean, it's positively a rainbow effect. And while he's pouring, he's not cooperating with anybody, but I come along and stir. I'm not cooperating with him. I'm using the occasion with him pouring to stir the sauce. It's kind of an artificial example, but that's the kind of case where somebody does something in the knowledge that somebody else is doing it, but there's no cooperation. That one of the marks is he violating some principle if he stops pouring? No, he doesn't owe you anything. He's just pouring because it's fun to pour. Yes?
How do mutual beliefs then tie into that? I mean, do they have to have a mutual belief?
I think the mutual belief follows from the collective intentionality. The mutual belief is a consequence of collective intentionality. It's not a constitutive of the collective intentionality. The idea the guys I'm opposed to is individual intentionality plus mutual belief constitutes collective intentionality. The view that I'm saying is no. Mutual belief will be a consequence of collective intentionality, because if we really do have this collective intentionality, then I have to believe that you're doing what I think you're doing, and you have to believe that I believe that, and so on up. But that's a consequence. That doesn't give us an analysis. At the very back, you got to shout loud because I'm hard of hearing.
What about if I intend to clap when everyone else starts clapping?
Yeah. Okay. Now, this is another a marvelous thing about collective intentionality. Typically, people will wait for somebody else to start. But once they start clapping, then it is collective. We are collectively clapping, but please, somebody else has to start. I mean, embarrassing silence where everybody's waiting for everybody else to clap. And one way which in Italian opera they used to disrupt the performance, if you wanted to disrupt the performance, was clap at the wrong times. Because, see, Wagner objected to this. Wagner thought it was awful that the audience would clap during the performance. And Wagnerian operas are arranged so you can never clap during a performance. That's one of a zillion things that's wrong with Wagnerian operas. Now, what Wagner didn't understand is that Italian opera is a dialogue between the performers and the audience. So the performers do their thing, and then there's this unbelievable applause, and there's just this emotional applause, and then suddenly they shut up as the next aria starts. So there is a collective intentionality between the audience and the performers, whereby the performers acknowledge the achievements by clapping. And it's interesting how I have a friend who puts on these operas, Jonathan Miller, and he thinks it's awful that audiences clap at a set design. The curtain goes up and the audience applauds. And Jonathan just thinks that's the most awful thing. I don't think it's awful at all. I think it's rather nice. Why shouldn't the designer of the stage have an expression of approval on the part of a collective expression of approval on the part of the audience? Anyway, you get these complex relationships. Okay, and then I got to go on. I got to make other progress. But you're next.
Okay, so going back to that point, it's just like if I start singing something from Wicked, and then someone hears it, and then they hear that it's like the cue for the duet part, and she just jumps in.
Yeah.
That isn't doing collective intentionality, but can it transform from that?
Yes. The question, as I understand it, is can I do something inadvertently that triggers collective intentionality? Sure, I think so.
When would it transform into that?
If it transforms into collective intentionality when there is an answer to the question, what are you now doing, that makes an irreducible reference to we. We are now singing a duet. I was just practicing the baritone part, and then I heard you practicing the soprano solo, and then suddenly we were off singing the duet together. Now that's a different case from the case where I just continued to practice the baritone part, and you practice the soprano part, and to my exasperation, we turn out to be singing what sounds exactly like a duet. That's a case where we're not actually cooperating. Okay, let's go on. Well, you had a question. Yeah.
Sorry, so if someone does join me and it becomes a duet, does that mean that I have collective intentionality?
Yes. If the answer to the question, what are you now doing, is I am singing as part of a duet, what we are now singing. That is, if the answer is there's an irreducible we in the answer, so if you say, we are singing a duet and I'm singing the soprano part, that's collective intentionality. If the answer is, I'm just singing the soprano part and some idiot started singing the baritone part, what can I do? I was singing the soprano part of Goethe's, Schiller's words to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Freude, schöne Götter, funken, Tochter aus Elysium. Wir betreten Feuer, trunken, himmlische dein Heil. Well, I won't tell you the whole damn thing. Okay. It is rather nice, actually, in a sort of optimistic 19th century way. But in any case, if I just happen to be singing that and somebody else happened to be playing the musical part, then that's not collective intentionality. There has to be an answer to the question, what are you now doing, that contains an irreducible we. Then you have collective intentionality. Maybe I didn't answer your question. You look puzzled. Yeah.
What if one person thinks we're singing and the other person thinks I'm singing and he's singing? Then is that collective intentionality for one person?
Well, it is an unfortunate fact about this formula, but it's an unfortunate fact about life that somebody can have this in his head and nobody's cooperating with him. Now, and conversations often take precisely this. You're proceeding on the basis of a mistaken assumption. If you're assuming that the other people are cooperating when they aren't. So you can have the form of the collective intentionality in your head, even though nobody is cooperating. Collective intentionality is successful when different people share it. But it's logically possible that this could be had by a brain in a vat. This could be had by a character in the Matrix who is not, in fact, cooperating with anybody because there's nobody there to cooperate. There are a lot of famous examples of this in literature. An example I like is in Dickens's, in the Pickwick Papers. Mr. Pickwick has a cleaning lady, and he is a rather pompous guy who can't say anything straight out, and he wants to hire a handyman to help out around the house. The cleaning lady thinks he is proposing marriage. So they have this cross purposes. He thinks we are cooperating and having a conversation where I'm going to hire a handyman. She thinks we're having a cooperation, a collective conversation where he's proposing marriage to me. So he says, you need a man around the house to help you out. And she says, oh, Mr. Pickwick. Well, I won't rehearse the whole thing for you, but this is how it goes. You see, this is, a lot of comedy is based on precisely this type of misunderstanding, where one party thinks we're doing one thing and another party thinks we're doing something else. And you can get in a lot of trouble, I'm telling you, if you travel to foreign cultures where the subtle differences in the language or patterns of what's considered appropriate behavior will emerge. Yes?
Two quick things. So in that case, you would say that you have two separate cases of
Yes.
collective intentionality.
Each person has this in their head, but they're not. There's no real cooperation. This is sometimes put as an objection to me, but I don't think it is. I think that's what life is like. I mean, a famous problem arises when Americans are in England and there's subtle dialect differences. So in England, in English, there is an expression to knock up, meaning to come and knock on somebody's door. So the Englishman tells the American visiting girl, I'll come and knock you up. And this does not this produces a communication breakdown. I'm talking about real life now. I mean, there are instances of this, and this is because of these subtle differences in the vocabularies. All right, now we ought to turn to intentional causation. How much time do I leave myself?
25 minutes.
Oh, well, that's plenty of time. All right, here goes. There is a standard account of causation that is so widely accepted as to constitute a kind of orthodoxy. I think that it won't bear a moment's reflection, but it is extremely powerful, and it begins with Hume. There are earlier examples than Hume. I mean, some people have traced it back to a medieval philosopher whose name escapes me. But in any case, Hume is the standard author. And what did Hume discover? Hume discovered that the causal relation between A and B, if you say A caused B, that there is nothing observable between A and B. There is no necessary connection. You remember how it goes in Hume's treatise. The components of causation are priority, the cause has to come first, contiguity, the cause and the effect have to be near each other in space and time. So if I sneeze and the Eiffel Tower falls over, then you can't say my sneeze caused the Eiffel Tower unless you can show there's a causal chain, as they like to say, that there's some connecting link between the cause and the effect, and a necessary connection. So for Hume, you have priority, C comes before E. In a limiting case, they might be simultaneous, but that's an embarrassment. Basically, the important thing is the cause cannot come after the effect. If I said, well, what caused your stomach ache yesterday? And I say, well, I ate too much food for breakfast this morning. That won't do as an answer because you can't have backward causation. Now, a lot of people are puzzled by that. Why not? You know, look, I brush my teeth today so that I won't get cavities tomorrow. But why not brush extra hard and make it the case that I didn't have cavities yesterday, you see? What's the matter with that? I mean, why are we so prejudiced about time? And Kant's answer to that, I mean, Kant had a good answer, and his answer was Hume neglects the fact that causation is an essential component of our notion of time. That time is precisely such a sequence of irreversible cause and effect sequences. But in any case, it just appears to be arbitrary that the cause has to come before the effect, that it can't come after the effect. Life would be a lot easier if we could now do things that make it the case that my teeth don't decay in the future. Things which, if I didn't do them, my teeth would decay. So why can't I do things that now make it the case that my teeth did not decay in the past? Why is it that the past is so damned recalcitrant in the way that it appears to be? All right, now another one, according to Hume, is contiguity. The cause and the effect have to be next to each other. And another way to put this is you cannot have action at a distance. Incidentally, one of the objections to Newton's theory of gravity was he postulates action at a distance. How can the moon affect the tides? There's no connection between the moon and the tides. Now what we did was we cheated. We said, well, there's a gravitational field. And the gravitational field gives the connection. And that's all you need is the gravitational field. And then, said Hume, there is a third component of causation, and that is the necessary connection. Hume likes to spell it with an X. Necessary connection between the cause and the effect, such that if the cause occurs, then the effect must occur. Now, said Hume, but there's an interesting thing. I cannot observe this necessary connection between the cause and the effect. Look as I might, I search around. I look at A and I look at B. What is the necessary connection? And Hume, with his mock sense of sadness, says, I am unable to find a necessary. Try as I might, I cannot find a necessary connection. But it's clear that nothing would count as a necessary connection, because if you said, well, there is a necessary connection, C, that won't help, because now you need a connection between A and C and B. And if you found that, you'd need a necessary connection between A and E and C and D and D and B. Does everybody see this point? When Hume says there is no necessary connection between the cause and the effect, that makes it look as if he somehow didn't find it, But what it is, it's a logical point. Nothing could count as a necessary connection because by definition, A and B are discrete events. Look, suppose I flip a light switch and the lights go on or off as the case might be. You might say, well, there is a necessary connection. I flip the switch and the lights at the back went off. And the necessary connection is the electricity running through the wire and activating the fluorescent gas or the tungsten filament. But that won't do because that's just another event. That is, what's the necessary connection between my flipping the switch and the current flowing, or the necessary connection between the activation of the tungsten filament and the light going on? All you get in history, in the history of the universe, is discrete events following discrete events. That's causation. What we think of as causation for Hume is literally just one damn thing after another. First one thing happens, then another thing happens. But now, says Hume, we looked around the woods and we couldn't find a necessary connection. There's no such thing as necessary connection. But we found something else. We found a constant conjunction of resembling instances. The thing that we call the cause was invariably succeeded by the thing we call the effect. And it is the constant conjunction of resembling instances that gives us the illusion of necessary connection, because it sets up an association in our mind whereby when we perceive the thing we call the cause, we get a lively idea of the thing we call the effect. And when we even think of the thing we call the cause, we get an idea of the thing we call the effect. It is, says Hume, this felt determination of the mind that gives us the illusion that there's something in addition to priority, contiguity, and constant conjunction. And the felt determination of the mind is a result of constant conjunction. Now, all of this is I put this in Hume's jargon. It's all 18th century jargon. But in the 20th and 21st century, it comes out as saying, for every singular causal statement, there must be a causal law. And the key to understanding causation is not that causation is actually a connection between events. There is no such thing. As Wittgenstein said in the Tractatus, the belief in causation is superstition. It's what's the German Unglaube. It's nonsense. It's empty to believe in causation. But there is something all the same that makes causal statements true. And what makes them true is constant conjunction. And now we put that in the form of saying there's a universal law. And the universal law specifies something as the cause and something as the effect. And now, and this is a key point, the terms in which the law is stated need not be the same terms as the terms in which the cause and the effect are identified. So to take an example from Davidson, if I say the event described on page 15 of the San Francisco Chronicle caused the event described on page 1, then that can be a true causal statement, but the law won't say anything about the San Francisco Chronicle. Suppose the event described on page 15 is that PG&E discovered there was a rupture in the pipeline in San Bruno, and the event described on page 1 is a massive fire in San Bruno. Then the rupture of the pipeline caused the massive fire, but we can identify that by saying the event described on page 15 and the event described on page 1. But the actual causal law won't make any reference to the San Francisco Chronicle. That'll be stated in different vocabulary. So, to take an example I give in the book in your assigned reading, if I say the thing that John did saw the phenomenon that Sally saw. Now, what John did was put the pot on the stove and turn the gas on, and what Sally saw was the water boiling. Then the thing he did caused the thing she saw, but the law won't say anything about John and Sally. The law will be about the behavior of water molecules under heat in the Earth's atmosphere and what happens when the pressure inside the body of water equals the pressure outside. It's called boiling. This is why the water boils at a lower temperature at higher elevations, because the air pressure is different. Okay, so that is the modern view. The modern view is there are no causes in the real world. In the real world, there are just regularities. And Hume's problem was, if I'm right in thinking that there is no such thing as necessary connection, then what fact makes a causal statement true? What fact makes it true? And the answer is that there is a constant conjunction, or rather, that everything has happened is describable by laws. And it's the laws, it's the instantiation of the constant conjunction that makes a causal statement true. So if you think AIDS is caused by the HIV virus, what you think is not that this made that happen. Nothing ever made anything else happen, according to this conception of causation. That's just superstition. What actually happens is there are regularities, and the regularities are such that when the thing we call a cause occurs, then it's invariably followed by the thing we call the effect under some description of the cause and the effect or other, not necessarily the description on which we identify them in ordinary speech. Okay, I think this is a wonderful philosophical theory because it's false in just about every respect. That there are no causes in nature, there's only regularities. The causal nexus is unobservable. You can never observe it. You can never have any experience of it. And for every singular causal statement, there must be a causal law. There has to be a causal law. How else could it be true? The only thing that could make it true is a causal law. Now, it's marvelous about philosophical theories, and this is a classic case, where if you moment you start to think of it in terms of examples, it obviously breaks down. I mean, for example, between the wars, there was a huge intellectual effort to identify something called the cause of the First World War, or the causes of the First World War. And everybody had different theories, mostly for the purpose of blaming somebody, either blaming the Germans or blaming the French or blaming the Russians. But the idea was to point the blame by identifying the causes. Now, I don't know what the law would look like if you say, well, really the cause of the First World War was the failure of the diplomatic apparatus that existed in 1914 to cope with major international crises, because the diplomatic apparatus was too weak. They had poor ways of communicating, and various other things happened, like the German railway timetables went into effect, and Russian mobilization. Once you start mobilizing Russia, you can't turn it off because millions of people are going to be called out. So the idea was that you identify the causes. Now, what on earth would a law look like that talks about, I suppose you listed all these causes: the failure of the diplomatic apparatus, the German railway timetables, the obscurantism of the Russian bureaucracy. I don't know what a law would look like that described those. So there are lots of cause and effect relations where there is no causal law, and there couldn't be, because the size of the events picked out are not the size than which the causal laws pick out events. Indeed, the truth is, most causal laws make no reference to events. If I say force equals mass times acceleration, F equals ma, then what are the events? Well, you can say, well, the application of force produces an acceleration of the mass. But okay, you can force it into that mold, but most causal laws make no reference. Furthermore, just to go back to the very beginning, the whole assumption is that causation is always a relation between discrete events. But there are lots of causal relations that are absolutely constant. This table has been exerting pressure on this floor 24/7, as they like to say. It does it all the time. Why? There's a constant causal force. It's called gravity. But gravity does not name an event. It's a permanent fixture. It's a permanent force that operates. So it's simply not the case that all causal relations are between discrete events. That you see why that has to be part of Hume's picture. Hume's picture is you identify this event and that event and that event, and then you find there's no connection between them. So you think, well, the thing that makes it true that there's a causal relation is that there is a universal law. And as I said, this is the standard account of causation. You'll find it in just about every textbook. It's in Davidson and it's in Fun Wright. I don't read as many textbooks as I should, but I think this is the contemporary orthodoxy. Okay, I'm now going to attack it more or less systematically. But first of all, let's get questions about what it is, about what the view is. There's a thing called the Stanford Encyclopedia. It's funded by the Berkeley University Library, but anyway, it's called the Stanford Encyclopedia, and we should probably look up and see what they're pretty good. I mean, they get good people to write for them, and the stuff I found in there is pretty good. Well, they seem pretty good unless they talk about something I actually know a lot about, and then they don't seem so good. But in any case, we should look up what the Stanford Encyclopedia says about causation and see if they repeat this orthodoxy. This is what I was brought up on as a kid. When I was an undergraduate, and I was taught Hume got it right about causation. He may not have been right about personal identity or all those other issues, but about causation, he wrote the book. I mean, he has the standard account of causation that is valid to this day. Causes are not real relations in the real world. Rather, what exists in the real world is universal laws, and that what we call a causation is just an instantiation of a causal regularity. Yes?
So if the brain people find out how consciousness comes about, will that take the form of a law?
Well, this is an interesting thing. Yeah, see, this is a beautiful thing. When you read books, look for what the philosophers say they're supposed to be. Now, the philosophers always say science is about laws. Well, I got interested in the brain, and this is how you learn any subject. You want to become an expert on any subject, buy the freshman textbooks. Because, if the freshman can understand it, you can understand it, right? Because you're not going to have a problem with the freshman textbook. So I went out and bought I bought a whole bunch of freshman textbooks on the brain, and I read them, and I couldn't discover any laws. They will tell you more than you ever wanted to know about the microanatomy of the synaptic cleft, and about all the exciting things that are happening in the hypothalamus. I spent many happy weeks in the hypothalamus. Lots going on in the hypothalamus. And all this other stuff. No laws. Occasionally they'd come up and say, well, this is an example of Smitherby's law, but unfortunately Smitherby's law is false. I mean, they usually find that the laws didn't actually work. So there are practically no laws. Now, I pointed this out to the leading textbook author in the United States, or indeed in the world, Eric Kandel, and he's written the best textbook. He, along with two other guys, have written the best textbook on the brain. Kandel, Schwartz, and what's the third guy's name? What? Jessel. Kandel, Schwartz, and Jessel is the best book on the brain. Unfortunately, it costs $100, but Eric sent me a copy, so I got a free copy out of it. But anyway, I asked him, how come there are no laws? You got this huge book, it's science, you didn't tell us any laws of the operation of the brain. And he said, well, we're getting there. We're young science. But that's the idea. The idea is, in the end, it's all going to be like physics, and it's all going to be one beautiful law after another. Now, I think there's something wrong about that, and I don't know quite how to say it, but I'm going to try to say part of it. So the short answer is, all of the experts agree there ought to be laws, but they think we're not there yet. We need more money, more graduate students, and bigger labs, and then we'll get the laws. I'm not sure that that's the right attitude to have. Yes?
It seems to me that the biological sciences, including neuroscience, would be they don't have laws of their own, but they're dependent on the physical laws.
Yes. Okay.
Science is governed by laws because the two basic sciences are chemistry and
Physics, right.
Some people say it's just physics.
Oh, okay. Well, chemistry is a branch of physics from this point of view. Yeah.
Like those would be, and that's the only one that has laws, but if that's the basic.
That'll all come out as physical laws. Right. Okay. No, but now I think this is the right answer at this stage of the debate, and that is, look, of course you don't have laws of the special sciences, and that's because The special sciences are realized in physics in multiple ways. And this phenomenon has got a famous name. It's called multiple realizability. And the favorite example of multiple realizability is how, I'm forgetting how to spell. Is there an E in realizability, or do you drop the E? I'll put a question mark next to the E. I don't think there is an E there. Oh no, the Z, there's definitely a. Okay. Anyway, multiple realizability. And the favorite example is how the same program can be realized in different hardwares. Now, at the level of the hardware, it's all physics, all straightforward engineering. It's electrical engineering, but you can have the same program realized in different hardwares, so you don't, in that way, have laws at the level of the program because it's realized, it has multiple realizability. And the idea is that certain types of brain phenomena can be realized differently in the physics, and it's always at the level of the physics that there are laws. There's something that ought to worry us about that, and that's this. The assumption that philosophers make, and it's very hard to avoid that assumption, if you could stack up all of the physical particles the same way they were stacked before, you'd have exactly the same effects. Does everybody feel this picture? That if all of the particles in the universe were arranged exactly as they were arranged at the time of the Big Bang, at the beginning of the universe, if we could get all the particles arranged that way again, then the history of the world would be exactly repeated. Does everybody see this picture? Because the same causes would always produce the same effects. Now, the important point for this is that we know from quantum mechanics that that's not true. You get a probability relation, but you don't get strict determinism at the quantum level. You might say, yeah, but that's just the quantum level. Yeah, but the problem is everything is made of the quantum elements. Everything is made of the quantum elements. So the philosopher's assumption is one I can't shake, is the assumption if you could just get all the physical particles in exactly the right, in exactly the way they were at the time of the Big Bang, then the entire history of the universe would be repeated exactly as it was. But we know from physics that's not true. If it did get repeated, it would just be a kind of fluke. It would be a statistical oddity, because there's nothing. The laws are not deterministic at the most fundamental level. The most you get are probabilities. Now, there's Searle's law, and that is anytime philosophers talk about quantum mechanics, it's hot air at best. I avoid using ruder expressions. So I'm very nervous about talking about quantum mechanics. By the way, often when physicists talk about quantum mechanics, it comes out as hot air as well. I think the standard Copenhagen interpretation isn't going to bear any weight because it has the absurd. Well, I asked one of these physicists who talks about this, is it your assumption that consciousness is part of the ultimate structure of the universe? Because that appears to be a consequence of the idea that it is the conscious agent that resolves the measurement problem in quantum mechanics, and that can't be right, because consciousness is not a basic feature of the universe. Everybody's got that sort of twitchy look as if the class is over. Is it? Have we run out of time? Okay, we'll go on with this on Thursday. On Thursday, we're actually going to get to the solution of our problems, I hope.